Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. Travel on much of Britain's railway system grinds to a halt again amid the second of 3 days of widespread strike action. The UK introduces a new raft of trade sanctions against Russia, including prohibitions on the export of a range of goods and technology and the export of jet fuel. The crisis around grain trapped in Ukraine must be resolved in the next month, says British Foreign Minister Liz Truss during a visit to Ankara, where she offered the UK's expertise to help resolve the situation. Sri Lanka's parliament cancels its remaining sittings for the week to save fuel as an economic crisis rapidly depletes the island nation's already scarce petrol supplies. Eight people who took care of soccer legend Diego Maradona will be tried in Argentinian courts for homicide after an investigation into his November 2020 death due to cardiac arrest. The UK's rail network is severely disrupted again as members of the RMT union stage their second full day of industrial action this week. Half of the rail network in England, Wales and Scotland is effectively closed. Only 20% of services are expected to be running and many areas don't have any operational trains at all. It's part of the biggest rail strikes the UK has seen in over 30 years. Protesting staff are demanding better pay, better job security and guarantees over working practices. Negotiations between the RMT union and rail bosses broke down again on Wednesday. The RMT says it wants to continue negotiations, but says if there is no settlement, then further strikes are likely. The Boris Johnson government says it won't get involved with the actual talks, but is criticising the strikes. Number 10 says the action is counterproductive and damaging to low-income workers. Well, our correspondent Sally Patterson is joining me live now from Farringdon Station in the centre of London. Sally, what's it like there?
Well, I'm at what is usually a very busy, a very bustling station in central London. Now, as you can see, there are still a few people wandering around. Some people have decided to try and get into work. Others are tourists who are quite confused at why they've suddenly been unable to get around the UK as was expected. Now, whilst today we do have some underground lines working, unlike the strike on Tuesday where the underground and the trains were completely stopped, today we do have the tubes open, but only about 20%, as you said, of trains are running today. We have one of the biggest music festivals in the world taking place, Glastonbury, and actually many revellers who are planning on going and enjoying their time there have been unable to get to the festival because they've been stuck on empty platforms or even outside closed stations.
And Sally, on those negotiations, where exactly do we stand as of now?
Well, as you say, we have seen talks going on for several days now between rail service owners and the unions. And the government has said that it will not get involved. This is a situation which is only for the owners of the rail networks and of the unions. But there are people who say, including the unions themselves, that the government is pulling the strings behind the scenes. And this, according to the head of the RMT union, this has been wrecking potential negotiations from taking place. Now, the government has, of course, strongly denied these allegations and said that it is entirely false to claim that it has got in the way of any agreement being reached. Now, the government, meanwhile, is also busy working on potential new laws that could allow agency workers to come in and replace workers who are on strike days. Now, this is hugely controversial, and of course the opposition Labour Party and the unions say that this would undermine the entire point of the strikes. So it doesn't look like there's going to be any agreement anytime soon. There's another strike planned for Saturday, and it looks like at this late stage that that's likely to also go ahead.
Sally, thank you. That's Sally Patterson at Farringdon Station in central London. Well, voters are headed to the polls in the UK in by-elections in 2 constituencies. Polling stations opened this morning in Tiverton and Honiton and in Wakefield, and they will close at 9 p.m. GMT. The results are expected sometime on Friday in the 2 constituencies that were won by the Tories in 2019.
As rumblings of recession get louder the world over, amid the raging Russia-Ukraine war, Modi, Xi, Putin, Bolsonaro and Ramaphosa come together with the focus on fostering the bloc's partnership. The leaders meet to address food shortages, supply disruptions and warning bells of a planet in peril. BRICS Summit. Continuous coverage on WION.
Well, the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa will virtually address the BRICS forum shortly. The gathering of emerging world economies is being hosted this time by China. A major focus is Russia amid the Ukraine crisis. President Vladimir Putin says Russia's focus will shift from Europe and the West to Asia and Africa. This as Russia's oil exports to China and India increase.
It is important that, despite all the problems and difficulties, the BRICS business circles are consistently expanding mutually beneficial ties in trade, financial and investment areas. Thus, the trade turnover of the Russian Federation with the countries of the 5 in the first 3 months of this year increased by 38%, up to $45 billion. And, of course, we are actively engaged in rerouting our trade flows and foreign economic contacts towards reliable international partners, primarily the BRICS countries.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping warned against expanding military ties.
For some time, economic globalization has faced headwinds and countercurrents. Some countries attempt to decouple with others, sever supply chains, and build a small yard with high fences. There is widespread concern in the international community that, should such a tendency continue, the global economy will become compartmentalized and mutually exclusive. Economic globalization is a response to development of productivity and represents an unstoppable historical trend. Anyone who attempts to turn back the wheel of history and block others' way will only have his own path blocked.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke of the importance of the BRICS nations in a post-COVID world. He says they can become the engines of growth.
ब्रिक्स की स्थापना इस विश्वास से हुई थी कि इमर्जिंग इकोनॉमीज का यह समूह वैश्विक ग्रोथ के इंजन के रूप में उभर सकता है। आज जब पूरा विश्व पोस्ट कोविड रिकवरी पर फोकस कर रहा है, तब ब्रिक्स देशों की भूमिका एक बार फिर बहुत महत्वपूर्ण रहेगी।
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro acknowledged recent shocks in global supply chains and trade flows and said that he plans to keep Brazil open to trade with the rest of the world. For more, we're being joined now by our correspondent Siddhant Sibal from New Delhi. Siddhant, to how big an extent is the Russia-Ukraine war dominating these proceedings?
Well, BRICS is a grouping which is dominated by China and Russia, so no open discussions when it comes to Russian invasion of Ukraine. But of course, it's fallout, the impact in terms of the price rise, commodity prices, the supply chain disruption is something that is expected to be discussed without, of course, the mention of Moscow's aggression. But we need to remember that this was primarily an economic grouping. It emerged after the financial crisis of 2008, and it has been taking political issues as well, but there are a lot of divergences within the grouping. India and China do not have a very good relationship. The Chinese aggressiveness at the border is still remembered here, and that has led to a downward trajectory in the relationship. So essentially, when it comes to this grouping, while a lot of progress has been made because of the differences between New Delhi and Beijing, question is how long this grouping can essentially have that glued together. But of course, India and Russia have good relationship. Yesterday, we saw the Russian President Vladimir Putin talking about Indian retail chains in Russia being talked about. So there are convergences as well. Today's meeting will be important in terms of the joint statement as to how the grouping essentially talks about areas of convergences. And this is the first summit-level meeting between the leaders, virtually, of course, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, you mentioned it being a virtual meeting, Siddhant. Of course, the BRICS nations are very much dealing with COVID-19 in a different way these days. That's another example of divergence.
Well, of course, when it comes to the COVID crisis, all the countries have a different set of helping each other, helping the world, and of course helping themselves as well. One of the key issues has been the origin of the COVID crisis. This is something that has been discussed across the world, and the Western countries are keen when it comes to this issue. But when it comes to this grouping, they're obviously not going to discuss in terms of blaming China, primarily because China is a key member of this grouping.
What about trade supply chains, though? You mentioned by Jair Bolsonaro. We heard Narendra Modi talking about a post-COVID recovery. Well, China is very much still in a zero-COVID world. Is that likely to be a bone of contention between the BRICS nations?
Well, even if there are areas of divergences and contention, it's not going to be reflected in the joint statement or at least in the opening statement, because the opening statement, of course, will be live. What will be talked about publicly or will be seen being talked about is the common camaraderie despite the divergences. And what Russia is going to do today will be interesting and important, because Russia will be keen to show that it has a set of partners across the world and two important countries, China and India, together. And yesterday we saw that pretty important statement and interesting statement as well, because the Russian president at the BRICS Business Forum talked about essentially how India and China have emerged as important importers of Russian crude oil. We know that Russian energy is facing sanctions from the West, from US, and of course Europe also talking about this issue. So Russia will be keen that two big economies in Asia become essentially in terms of importer of Russian goods, and of course Russia becomes a big market for Indian and the Chinese goods. So Russia will be keen to use this BRICS format for, of course, talking to world leaders at a time when it has been facing growing isolation from Europe, from the West. So essentially the BRICS groupings meeting is important in that terms. But also, we need to understand that this meeting is coming just days before the G7 meeting. The G7 meets in Bavaria from Sunday. So that we will see a strong statement from the G7 group of countries when it comes to dealing with Russia and sending a strong message to Moscow.
Siddhant, thank you. Meanwhile, the head of the International Energy Agency has warned that Europe needs to prepare immediately for a scenario where Russia stops supplying gas to the continent. The executive director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, made the comments to the BBC. This as several European countries say they are receiving significantly less Russian gas than expected. For example, the flow of natural gas through Nord Stream 1 is at 40% capacity. The Italian energy firm ENI says it has received only half of the gas it was expecting from Russia's Gazprom. Slovakia and Austria have also reported falls, and France says it's received no Russian gas via Germany since the 15th of July. Poland, Bulgaria, Finland, Denmark and the Netherlands have had their Russian gas deliveries suspended after they refused to pay in Russian rubles. Russian officials have denied deliberate wrongdoing and they pin the blame on technical issues. The IEA chief says he believes the cuts are geared towards preventing Europe from filling its storage, thereby giving Russia leverage in the winter months. With a war going on in the east of Europe and tensions with Russia at an all-time high, countries in the European Union are racing to refill storage sites. Germany's hoping to reach 90% of capacity by November. At present, though, its stores are only half full. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has headed to Turkey, the Saudi prince's first visit to the country since the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. It's an attempt to begin a reset of ties.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arrived in Turkey for the first time in years on Wednesday for talks with President Tayyip Erdogan, marking a turnaround in their relations. The visit was aimed at fully normalising ties between Ankara and Riyadh that were ruptured after a Saudi hit squad killed and dismembered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 at the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul. Erdogan at the time blamed the killing on the highest levels of the Saudi government. Prince Mohammed denies any involvement in the murder. In April, the pair held one-on-one talks in Saudi Arabia after a months-long drive to mend relations. Ankara stopped all criticism and halted its murder trial in April, transferring the case to Riyadh in a move condemned by human rights groups. The Crown Prince has been making effort to rehabilitate his image beyond the Gulf, leveraging Saudi Arabia's vast wealth and oil production capacity to lure in Western leaders and private business partners. The visit also comes as Turkey's economy is badly strained by a slumping lira and inflation soaring beyond 70%. Analysts say Saudi funds and foreign currency could help Erdogan shore up support ahead of elections by June 2023. Erdogan welcomed Prince Mohammed at the presidential palace in Ankara with a ceremony, and the two shook hands and embraced before being met by members of the Turkish cabinet. There were, however, no public statements scheduled for after their talks. Erdogan said last week he and Riyadh's de facto leader would discuss to what much higher level they can take ties during talks in Ankara.
Now let's go to one of the forward locations along the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. We'll be taken there by WION's Idris Lone, who's travelled there. Soldiers are using the latest tech at their positions at a height of around 12,000 feet above sea level.
This is the line of control which divides India and Pakistan, and the troops here have no time to rest. Despite the inclement weather, these soldiers are patrolling the Machil sector of Kupwara district of Jammu and Kashmir. The snow may have melted, but there is an ever-present danger of terrorists sneaking in from Pakistani side. These men cannot let their guard down.
We are at the moment at the border where you can completely see that laced with arms and ammunition, all these Jawans are patrolling at the line of control, making sure that this whole area is completely militant free. And if we talk about the right side, that is the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and that's the forward post of Indian Army Jawans, from where you can keep an eye on if there is a movement from the other side, if there are infiltrators who are trying to cross over into this territory.
Perched on extremely hilly steep mountain areas, the soldiers are keeping a hawk eye on the enemy pickets. And there is a sense of urgency after intel reports indicated that 200 terrorists are waiting at terror launch pads of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
That's the point of serving the country. Whether it's cold or it's raining, no matter what, we join the army to serve our country.
Our
morale stays high because we receive that kind of training while joining the army. No matter how harsh the weather is, our goal is to stay happy and alert while guarding our country. We fulfill our duty with determination and to the best of our ability.
Bad weather is a norm here. This is nothing. We will patrol even if there is 3 to 4 feet of snow. No matter how much it snows, if we get orders, we will go patrolling even 50 times a day if needed. We came here to protect our motherland, and we will do that.
But in such harsh terrain, there is no better alternative than boots on the ground as these men in uniform patrol the border.
Machil sector is considered to be one of the easiest route for infiltrators to cross over from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir to the Indian territory. We're at the forward post of Indian Army at the moment, and as you can see, the fence that divides the two countries. The left side is Indian side as well as the right side is Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
LOC spreads to around 740 kilometers of Jammu and Kashmir. And with the snow melting, something which the terrorists and their handlers have been waiting for, the risk of infiltration increases. So does the vigil.
We're at the last post of Indian Army guarding the line of control. This is the same area. If we talk about last 1 decade, this was the most prone area to whether it was infiltration or it was ceasefire violations. But finally, peace returning to this area, which is the last forward post of Indian Army. With video journalist Feroz, Idris Loan for WION World is One.
Medical staff caring for Diego Maradona before his death in 2020 have been charged with criminal negligence and will stand trial before an Argentine court. It came on the 36th anniversary of the football great's most memorable performance, most forgettable if you're English, those 2 goals against England at the 1986 World Cup. The World Cup winner died of a heart attack at a private care facility just outside the Argentinian capital city of Buenos Aires. Diego Maradona had a history of alcohol and cocaine abuse and had battled multiple health problems after the end of his playing days. Maradona's family was not convinced by the treatment he had received, and Argentinian prosecutors launched an investigation into the doctors and nurses involved in his care. A medical board ruled last year that the caregivers, which included Maradona's personal physician, acted in an inappropriate, deficient and reckless manner that led to his death. A judge has ordered a culpable homicide trial against the 8 medical personnel based on the report. All 8 will be tried on a legal definition of homicide based on negligence committed in the knowledge that it may lead to a person's death. If found guilty, the sanctions could range between 8 to 25 years in prison. No date has yet been set for the trial. Now, amidst Lebanon's economic crisis, Lebanese traditional pottery has seen a sharp drop in demand, but some local ceramicists are determined to keep the craft alive.
My relationship with this craft is more sentimental than it is work. This craft is artistic more than it is functional. This profession has creativity, it has beauty in the work.
This is Khaled Daw, one of the few ceramists left in Lebanon. In this quaint little workshop, Khaled continues to use the skills that he inherited from his father to make traditional pottery, a dying art in Lebanon. Though demand for pottery has hit unprecedented lows owing to the country's economic woes, Khaled is determined to keep the craft alive.
Look, for me, as long as I am capable, actually, as long as I am alive, I won't let go of this craft, even if it ended up not providing me a loaf of bread. I love this craft and I grew up to it. In this craft, when I come here every morning, I feel that I am collecting my memories and my past. I am remembering my late father and our childhood because I inherited this job from him. We work with the same spirituality.
Traditional Lebanese pottery goes back thousands of years to the Phoenicians and has been unable to secure a space for itself in the current Lebanese market, one that is struggling to stay afloat. Despite all of that, Khalid continues his work here with the help of his companion, Jafar. The recent global energy crisis has rendered fuel unaffordable, which called for a few changes in infrastructure. So Khalid built a wood-fired oven to continue his operations. Nothing can come between him and his art. And he hopes that his resilience and fight to continue traditional handcrafted pottery will lead to the revival of this craft. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Thanks for watching. I'm Ollie Barrett. See you tomorrow.
There are many other... this is right, Arab.